Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast, your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hello, and welcome back, Woo Crew, to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and today's episode is going to be a solo episode. So as you know, if you've been here for a little while, these episodes are a little bit shorter and sweeter. Well, not sweeter, they're shorter than my guest episodes. But today's episode is actually inspired by a conversation that I had with a guest. You haven't heard it yet. It's coming out in a couple of weeks with my dear friend Kyla Gagnon. But while we were chatting, the topic of surrender came up. And it was the second time in that day, actually, that the topic had come up, as it had come up earlier for me with a client. And when things happen multiple times in close succession, I have been trying to pay attention to it. And so today we're going to talk about the word, the idea of the act of surrender. I'd like to start by encouraging you to pause for just a moment and tune into your breathing, feel into your body. If you're driving while listening to this, obviously keep focused on the road, please. But if you're not driving, you might even want to close your eyes for just a breath, putting your hand on your chest and one on your belly, and tune into how the word surrender lands in your body. What comes up for you? How does it feel when you think about this word? As with so much in our lives, we have lots of stories about the word or the act of surrender. We have lots of beliefs, and many of these stories and beliefs are not actually ours. They're informed by, our history, ancestral rememberings, as well as our own lived history in the world and the cultural norms, beliefs that we've picked up along the way. And so when the word surrender comes up, do you think about the idea of failure, defeat, surrender in terms of a war, perhaps? And that's actually one of the definitions, obviously, of the word surrender to an enemy or to the conquering force. But I don't want to talk about that version of surrender. I want to talk about surrender in our own lives. Hey, Woo Crew. I wanted to let you know about the summer healing special that I am running. For the months of July, August, and September, I am offering support in the form of remote healing packages. So this looks like bi-weekly remote energy healings and readings with voice note support in between. Really the perfect way to receive healing and guidance through those busy summer months when maybe you don't have time to add another appointment to your calendar. You choose the day of the week. I drop into your energy while you go about your day, and I send over the guidance that I receive from your guides and the healing work that I do, along with any tools or homework that may be useful to you on your journey by voice note. In addition, you get voice note support in between these sessions for the entire month. If you are interested in jumping into this, I've left the link to hop on in below, but you can also come on over to Instagram at I am Eileen March or send me an email, Eileen@myluminouslife. I've left a link below as well for a 30-minute free chat to discuss whether this offer is a fit for you. I want to talk about surrender in our own lives. And when we think about surrender in this space, the emotions that come up or the feelings or ideas that can come up often center around this feeling of a loss of control and or of giving up. So if it's one of those two things, or maybe both, that came to mind when I started speaking about surrender, and maybe when you hear that word surrender, your body responds with a tightening or a gripping, maybe there's fear in your belly at the thought of losing control, that would be really, really normal. I'm going to assume if you are listening to this, there's a really high likelihood that you identify as a woman in this world, as the majority of my listeners are. But even if you identify as a man, the loss of control is something that feels really scary for all of us, I would say, which is in a lot of ways, I'm smiling as I say this because the illusion of control is really that we do not ever have control. We worry and think about all of the things that could happen or might happen or could go wrong and try to plan for every scenario. That gives us the feeling of control, the illusion of control. But again, it is just an illusion. At any moment, things, events far beyond your reach and ability to even impact, let alone control, could happen and completely change the lived reality of your life. And so I'm not saying all of this to scare you by any means, but just to draw attention and light to this fact that when we think about the loss of control, we are thinking about the loss of something that we never really actually had. And in some ways, this is really liberating. And so the idea of surrender, the way that I am conceptualizing it for us here, is really about allowing. I was writing this morning in my morning pages about this concept, about what does surrender mean and why is it so hard? And, when we think about surrender as giving up, it doesn't sound like something we want to be doing. And so if you equate surrender with giving up, you definitely will not want to move towards it. But it's not a passive process. It's not a passive act. It's about allowing and being in flow with life as it is happening all around us and as we are moving through it. It's about letting go of resistance to what is so that you have the freedom and the energy and the equanimity to act in your world, upon the world, and perhaps change that reality. It's almost ironic that letting go of control, of the perception of control and ability to do that, actually gives us the freedom and the ability to change our reality. Surrender also feels like a scary place to be because it requires vulnerability and trust. And I know that this is a big hurdle for a lot of women, is that piece of trust. Trust that we can rely upon the other people in our lives, which often, that trust has been broken. So I'm thinking about a situation with a client where the struggle was there to trust that her partner would be able to follow through on some of the promises of chores. This is basic. We're not talking emotional trust here. We're talking basic, I will do what I've said I will do, and I will be responsible to motivate myself to do it. I'm sure that many of you can resonate with the experience of having a partner say, when you're upset or perhaps annoyed that things aren't getting done around the house, that response of, well, I'll do it, just ask me to. And the absolute exhaustion that comes from having to be the one to keep a tally and know what needs doing. Right? So this is a bit of a sidetrack, but it is all related to this idea of surrender and flow. So that trust piece has to be there. To surrender to the flow of life requires that we trust the universe, really. Without that trust, it is so hard to let go, right? To let go of the shore, as it were. If you don't trust that your boat can navigate the ocean, how can you untether from that pier, from the shore? Surrender also is something that falls outside of what capitalism would have us do. Because part of surrender, part of allowing, part of being in flow is that we also must surrender to our body's needs for rest, for nourishment, for movement, surrendering to our animal bodies and the things that they need and desire in this life. It is to admit that we are tired and have that be okay. It is to admit that for us, an afternoon spent playing with our children is more fulfilling than an afternoon spent toiling to produce more for the capitalist machine. I am painting really sweeping, broad generalizations here. I feel like this is a really surface level touch on this topic that could go so deep. But it is the utmost connection or utmost admission that we are human bodies, human animals on this planet, and to surrender to that reality and make that be a good thing rather than a failure or a weakness, right? There is this message that is woven through all of our society that to require more rest, to desire to tend to yourself is not only selfish, but weak. And so part of surrender is deciding that the opinions of others, the opinions of society are not as important or don't matter at all, perhaps, in your own tending to yourself. When I was jotting my notes about this topic of surrender, I also came up against this realization that surrendering to reality, that allowing, also requires an acknowledgement of our mortality, of our frailty, of our needs, right? All of these things that we often don't want to look at because they are out of our control, once again. But it's also this kind of parallel state of being to the practice of mindfulness. So in mindfulness practices, the idea is to be aware and conscious of thoughts, behaviors, the things around you, but in a non-judgmental and non-reactive way. And when you are operating from this place of awareness without judgment, we call it equanimity. You are more able to respond to life rather than reacting to it. And in a lot of ways, this is what surrender is. You're not surrendering and giving up and saying that, okay, well, I guess this is just how it is, so I'm going to live with it. You're surrendering the sense of needing to fight against where it is that you find yourself. It's a surrender to, for instance, the reality that you have two small children and carving out an hour every day for yourself to meditate and journal when you're the person who stays at home with your kiddos and your partner is out working a job, the reality that needs surrendering to there is that carving out an hour every day is probably not actually possible in this 3D world. And so then having that beautiful acceptance, right? Because surrender is about acceptance, allows you to then say, okay, so if I can't have this hour I would love to have for quiet contemplation and solitude, how do I weave contemplation and brief moments of being with myself throughout my day, my busy day? How do I tap into the reality of the situation that I'm in to create more spaciousness and ease and room for wonder and joy, instead of coming into this place of feeling resistant to the lived reality that you're in, which only adds uncomfortable emotions on top of an already possibly uncomfortable situation. And knowing all this is fine and dandy, and actually putting it into practice, it's not easy. It takes work. It takes practice. Like any other muscle, this practice of surrender, of allowing, of being in trust and in flow with the universe, it's something that requires conscious returning to over and over and over. In another podcast interview recently that will be coming out next week as you listen to this, my guest Chris Williams and I were chatting about that old adage that, you don't go to the gym once and expect to have a six-pack. And yet, so often with these belief and behavior patterns that we have, we feel as though we should be able to change them overnight. We feel as though simply recognizing that they exist should be enough to change them or get rid of them. And it's just not true. I need this reminder over and over. There's this sense of like, well, I know better, so I'm going to change that and stop behaving that way. And the reality is that these behaviors, these thought patterns, they are like a muscle that's been used for so long that it's overly developed. And, I'm going to take this into the gym. I've been going to the gym lately. Who even am I? I've joined a ladies who lift class, and I go 2-3 times a week. And I have patterns in my body, muscles that have been compensating for other muscles that don't want to turn on because they never have. And so it's like these, thought patterns and beliefs and behaviors, these certain parts of my body will compensate for the weaker areas. And it takes conscious effort, repetition, over and over, and time to shift these muscle patterns. And so the same is true of thought patterns, habits, beliefs, behaviors. Just because you see the other path doesn't mean that the ruts on your road aren't so freaking deep that it's really hard to get out of them and start taking that other path. And for the first little while, those paths run so close together that it's really easy to slip back into those ruts, right? And so as you start to practice the things that we talk about here in these solo episodes, surrender, leaning into play, presence, authenticity, all of these things, they all require time and patience and so much self-compassion, because you will fall back into old patterns, especially if you are tired or overwhelmed or hungry. Any of these things that deplete your energy a little bit or a lot bit will make it harder to follow the new path or continue to surrender or continue to live in that place of authenticity or continue to make the effort to be present, to play, to respond rather than react. It is easier for your brain, we said this before and we'll say it again, to default back to those old learned patterns of behavior. It literally takes less energy consumption in your brain to follow those deep ruts or grooves, those myelinated neural pathways. And not only does it take less energy, it's faster. One of the cool things about myelination, which is this sheath that covers the neural pathway between neurons, is that the thicker it is, the faster the nerve impulses travel along those sections. And so not only does it require less energy, it actually happens faster. So maybe that gives you a little bit of comfort as you begin or continue on your journey of learning to create new ways of being and moving in the world. All right, well, that was meandering as they usually are. I hope that some of this resonated with you or all of it. I hope that you are coming away from this episode with a sense of at least curiosity about how that word idea of surrender feels in your body. It is a very divine feminine or sacred feminine energetic. And again, when we have lived in a world where the divine feminine has been almost reviled, it really hasn't been something that the society we live in treasures or honors. Instead, it's been this, push, go, do more, conquer. We've really lived in the masculine and prized the masculine for so long that when we start to try to cultivate these more feminine energetics in ourselves, in our world, there's a lot of pushback. There is a lot of fear and also of misunderstanding. So circling back to how we started, that idea that surrender is failure, a defeat, that loss of control or giving up, that's a misunderstanding of the root or the essence of this idea of surrendering to the flow, to the universe, of allowing for things to be as they are so that we may change them. Okay. That is all for today, Woo Crew. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. As always, if you like this episode, please leave a rating, a review. It helps so much to get this podcast discovered. If you know anybody who would like to listen, please share it with them or share on Instagram and tag at the.woocurious.podcast or myself at I am Eileen March. I hope that you will tune in next week for my conversation with Chris Williams. And as always, if you have any topics that you would like me to speak to, even if it's something that I've already spoken to before, but you'd like me to return and go deeper, I love to hear what it is that gets your curiosity moving, and I'm always happy to oblige. So that's all for now. Much love, many blessings. I'll be back here next week. Bye for now.